Step back, nurse. Let the professionals work. Battalion Chief Garrett Voss said it without turning his head, the way a man swats at something he has already decided is small, and he said it into the worst minute of the worst morning of his 26 years on the job, at 7-Eleven on a fog-blind Tuesday in October, standing on the cracked center line of the eastbound lanes of the Cauldron Pass interchange, where 41 vehicles had folded into one another in the whiteout and lay steaming and broken across 4 lanes and a guardrail, and he had no idea, none at all, that the woman in the gray fleece and the worn jeans he had just ordered out of his scene was the only person within 6 miles who had ever run a mass-casualty triage line where the casualties came in faster than the bags could be opened. He thought he was clearing a bystander. He was waving off the one set of hands that knew, to the second, how long the people screaming in those cars actually had. The woman did not argue, she did not flush, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not reach for the phone in her pocket that held, if anyone had cared to ask, a number that could have ended the argument in 9 words. She took 1 step back, exactly 1, the boot heel coming down soft on the broken glass, and she let her eyes go past the chief's shoulder and out across the wreck. And what she did in that 1 second was not retreat. It was a count. Left to right, near to far, the way she had been taught on ground that did not forgive a slow count, she read the field. The overturned panel van with the diesel sheen spreading under it, the sedan crushed nose first into the back of a flatbed with a child's arm hanging slack from the rear window, the school activity bus canted hard against the guardrail with steam coming off its hood and faces in every window. The man on the asphalt 20 feet out who was not moving and was the wrong color, the 2 who were sitting up and screaming because the ones who are dying do not have the breath to scream. She counted, and the number she came to made the muscles along her jaw go still, and she put her hand for 1 second flat against her own sternum, where under the gray fleece a small brass whistle hung warm against her skin on a worn loop of paracord, and she felt the cold, true weight of it, the way another person might have reached for a cross. Then she did the only thing the count allowed. She stepped forward again, past the chief's shoulder, not through it, and she knelt beside the man on the asphalt who was the wrong color, and she put 2 fingers to the side of his throat and her cheek an inch from his open mouth, and she said, to no one, in a voice that did not rise and did not shake, and carried anyway across 30 feet of chaos, the way a flat stone carries across water, "This one's airway. Now, somebody get me a jaw and a roll." Her name was Tessa Calderon. She was 43 years old. She was a flight nurse on her day off, driving home from a night shift with a thermos going cold in the cup holder, and she had come over the rise into the Cauldron Pass at 7:04 in 0 visibility and stood on the brake and felt her own little hatchback shudder to a stop 11 feet from the back of a logging truck. And she had sat for 1/2 second with both hands on the wheel and her heart going, and then she had done what she always did, which was the next correct thing. She had put on her hazards, she had pulled to the shoulder, she had taken the orange go bag from behind her seat, the one she had carried in one form or another for 19 years, and she had walked into the white toward the sound of people who needed someone who would not look away. She did not announce herself. She never did. That was the first thing the morning had wrong about her, and it would not be the last. What no one on the Cauldron Pass knew yet, not the chief, not the 4 exhausted engine companies fighting their way up the jammed shoulder, not the paramedics counting their too few rigs, not the troopers trying to hold a perimeter against gawkers who slowed to film the dying, was that the plain woman kneeling on the asphalt with a stranger's airway in her hands had spent 11 of her 19 years in a uniform in places whose names did not appear on any map a civilian would recognize, learning a single trade to a depth almost no one alive shared. How to decide in the first 90 seconds, with no equipment and no time and no help coming, who could be saved and who could not, and how to hold a line of broken bodies together with her bare hands until the help arrived. She had a rank. She had a unit. She had a name they had called her on the worst ground in the world. A single word, spoken into a radio under fire more times than she let herself remember. And she had not said any of it out loud in 4 years, because she had come home to be a nurse, not a legend, and because the people who really do the thing almost never need to tell you they did it. Battalion Chief Garrett Voss did not know any of that. He knew that he was the incident commander of the largest pileup the county had seen in a decade, that the fog had grounded the medevac birds, that he had 4 engines, 3 medic units, 11 firefighters, and a number of patients he had not yet been able to count, and that a woman in civilian clothes had just put her hands on a patient inside his command. And so he turned, finally, and looked at her and said it again, louder, so the troopers near him would hear that he was running his scene. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. This is an active incident. We have trained personnel inbound. You being here is a liability." He said it the way men say things when they are frightened and cannot afford to look it. "I appreciate you wanting to help. I do. But you're going to get hurt, or you're going to get one of my people hurt, and I cannot have that. So I am asking you one time, as the incident commander, step back behind the cones and let the professionals work." She did not look up from the man on the asphalt. Her hands were doing something precise and ugly and necessary at his jaw, and his chest, which had not been moving, hitched once, and again, and began, raggedly, but it began to rise. "He's breathing," she said, to the patient more than to the chief. "Good, stay with me." And then, only then, she looked up at Garrett Voss, and her eyes were the steadiest thing on that whole screaming highway, and she said, without heat, the sentence that would replay in his memory for the rest of his life: "Chief, with respect, you have a mass casualty incident here. Your birds are grounded, and right now nobody is running triage. I can run it, or you can keep talking to me, and we can lose the ones on the clock. Your call. But make it in the next 30 seconds, because the man in the blue sedan has about that long." For 1 second, the chief almost listened. Something in the flat certainty of her, the way she had said the next 30 seconds like a fact and not a guess, reached the part of him that had spent 26 years learning to trust the people who stayed calm when the world came apart. But the part of him that won was the older, prouder part. The part that had clawed up from Proby to battalion chief by never, ever ceding his ground to someone without the right patch on their shoulder. He saw a woman in a fleece. He heard a civilian telling him his job, and he did the thing that men in charge do when fear and pride braid together into the same rope. "I don't know who you think you are," he said, "but you're not running anything on my scene. Trooper, get her back behind the line." He turned away from her, already lifting his radio to his mouth, already certain the matter was closed. "Command to all units. Be advised, we've got civilians in the hot zone. I want a hard perimeter." He never finished the sentence, because that was the moment the panel van's spreading diesel found the hot manifold of the crushed sedan beneath it, and the first fire bloomed orange in the fog, and the screaming changed key, and the morning that Garrett Voss thought he was already losing began, in earnest, to come apart in his hands. And the woman he had just ordered off his scene was the only person there who had ever stood in exactly this fire before and known what to do next. She would not say so. She would simply do it. And by the end of the day, on the same stretch of broken highway, in front of the same exhausted men, a senior officer would step out of an arriving vehicle, take one look at the plain woman in the gray fleece who had held the whole catastrophe together with her bare hands, and stop and straighten and say a single word that changed everything every man on that scene believed about her. He would call her Commander. But that was 11 hours away. First, there was the fire and the fog and the count and the long, brutal proving of what a person is actually worth when the credentials stop mattering and only the work is left. To understand what Tessa Calderon did on the Cauldron Pass, you have to understand what she had stopped doing and why. For 4 years, she had been, by deliberate and patient choice, ordinary. She drove a 9-year-old hatchback with a dent in the rear quarter panel she had never bothered to fix. She rented the upstairs half of a duplex from a retired machinist named Hollis, who left tomatoes on her step in August. She worked as a flight nurse for the Regional Air Medical Service, which meant she spent her shifts strapped into the back of a helicopter being lowered onto the worst day of strangers' lives, and she was very good at it, and almost no one she worked with knew anything about her beyond the fact that she was very good at it and never talked about herself. She liked it that way. She had earned it that way. Because before the duplex and the hatchback and the cold thermos in the cup holder, Tessa Calderon had been Colonel Tessa Calderon of the Joint Expeditionary Medical Command, a fictional thing, a thing that does not appear in any real order of battle, but real enough to the people who served under it that they would have walked into fire on her word, and several of them had. She had commanded the 9th Forward Resuscitation Team, a small hard unit whose job was to be dropped, with almost nothing, into the gap between the point of wounding and the field hospital, where most of the dying actually happens, and to keep men and women alive across that gap with their hands and their wits and whatever they could carry on their backs. The work had a name in the unit, a grim joke that had stopped being a joke. Holding the line, not the front line, the line between alive and dead. You held it with a tourniquet and a needle and a decision made in the first 90 seconds, over and over, until the helicopters came, or the sun came up, or they did not. Her people had called her, on the radio and to her face, by the call sign that came with command of the 9th. They had called her Anvil. And in the field, in the way of units that compress a whole identity into one word, they had called her something else, the thing you call the one who runs the line and whose word is final and whose hands you trust with your own life. They had called her Commander. She had been good at it the way she was now good at everything, quietly, completely, without spectacle. She had a chest full of ribbons she kept in a cigar box on the top shelf of a closet she rarely opened, including a fictional decoration called the Meridian Cross with the device for valor, given for a night on hard ground when she had run a casualty collection point through 6 hours of fire and brought out 31 of 34, the 3 she did not bring out being the 3 arithmetic she still did at 3 a.m. on the night she did the arithmetic. She had a folded flag in the same closet, and a letter, and a brass triage whistle on a loop of paracord that she did not keep in the closet, because the whistle she still wore every day under her shirt against her skin where no one saw it. The whistle was old. The brass was worn smooth and gone the color of an old penny from 19 years of being held in a fist. Along one side, almost rubbed away, you could just read 4 words stamped into the metal by a machinist in a unit that no longer existed: steady hands, hard ground. She had blown that whistle to start more triage lines than she could count, the long blasts that meant move, the short doubles that meant this one first. She did not blow it anymore, but she wore it because some part of her that she did not examine too closely needed to feel its weight against her sternum when the world got loud. And on the morning of the Cauldron Pass, kneeling beside a dying stranger in the fog, when she put her hand flat to her chest, that was what she was touching. She had come home for a reason she never explained to anyone, which was that she had decided on a specific night she could date to the hour that she had spent enough of her life deciding who died, and that she wanted to spend the rest of it on the other side of the arithmetic, pulling people back across the line one at a time instead of choosing which ones to let go. So she had let the commission lapse. She had taken the civilian job. She had become, on purpose, a nurse that no one looked at twice, and she had been at peace with it more or less for 4 years. And then, at 7-Eleven on a fog-blind Tuesday in October, a frightened man in a white helmet had looked at the plainest version of her she had ever built and said, "Step back. Nurse, let the professionals work," and the universe, which has a sense of humor about these things, had arranged for him to say it on the one kind of ground where she was, beyond any argument, the most professional person there. The fire under the panel van changed everything in the space of 4 seconds. Before it, the Cauldron Pass had been a bad accident. Terrible, but static, a field of broken metal and trapped people that the responders could work methodically as the engines arrived. After it, it was a clock, and the clock was loud. The diesel that had been spreading in a slow sheen under the van caught along its leading edge and ran, the way burning fuel runs, toward the crushed sedan and the flatbed and the cluster of stopped cars beyond, and the fog lit up orange from underneath, and a column of black smoke began to climb into the white, and from inside 3 different vehicles, people who had been moaning began to scream, because nothing in the human animal is older than the terror of being trapped near fire. Garrett Voss reacted exactly as his training told him to, which was the tragedy of the next 10 minutes, because his training was built for a structure fire or a single vehicle wreck, and not for this, and he knew it, and the knowing made him grip the familiar protocol harder. Engine 4, pull a line, get water on that van now. Engine 2, I want the bus. Get those kids off the bus. Medic units, stage at the cones. Do not advance until I clear the fire. His voice was good, trained, carrying. He moved his people like pieces, and every order he gave was defensible, and the sum of them was a disaster in slow motion, because he was fighting the fire and evacuating the loudest patients and staging his medics back out of danger, and not one of those things was triage. And triage, the cold, fast, brutal sorting of 41 vehicles worth of human beings into who gets help first, was the only thing that was going to determine how many people went home. Tessa Calderon knew this the way you know the sun is up. She had watched 100 good commanders make exactly this mistake on smaller scales, the mistake of treating a mass-casualty incident like a big version of a single-patient emergency, of pouring everyone toward the patient who was screaming loudest while the silent ones, the airway ones, the bleed ones, the ones already too far gone to make noise, slipped under without anyone choosing it. She knew that the screaming patients were, almost by definition, not the ones about to die, because the dying do not have the air to scream. She knew that the man whose airway she had just opened would lose it again in 90 seconds if no one held his jaw, and that the child in the crushed sedan with the slack arm needed to be assessed before the fire reached the fuel and the choice was made for them, and that somewhere in those 41 vehicles there were almost certainly 2 or 3 people bleeding out from a survivable wound who would die in the next 8 minutes for want of a strip of cloth and a hard hand, simply because no one had walked the line and found them. She had 30 seconds of standing still in her, and she spent it on a decision. She could obey the chief, step behind the cones, and watch a preventable number of people die in front of her and live with it, the way you live with the 3 out of 34. Or she could disobey a lawful order from an incident commander on an active scene, which was not nothing, which had real consequences, which was exactly the kind of thing that ended civilian careers and got people charged, and do the work she was, beyond anyone's argument, the most qualified person there to do. It was not, for her, a hard decision. It only looked like one from the outside. She had made the same decision, in harder forms, more times than she could count, and the rule she had learned about it on hard ground was simple and total. When you are the most capable person present, and people will die if you defer to rank, you do not defer to rank. you do the work, and you account for it afterward, and you let them do to you whatever they are going to do. She reached up under the collar of her gray fleece, and she drew out the brass whistle on its worn paracord loop, and she closed her fist around it for 1 second, and then she put it to her lips and blew one long, flat, rising blast that cut across the whole screaming highway like a blade, a sound that did not belong to a civilian in a fleece, a sound trained into people in places this chief had never been, and every responder on the Cauldron Pass turned to look at where it had come from. And in the 4 seconds while she had them, before the chief could countermand her, Tessa Calderon did the thing she had come home to stop doing. She took command of the line. "Listen to me," she said, and she did not shout it, she pitched it, the way you pitch a voice to carry over engines without straining, a skill that takes years and a particular kind of life to learn. "I'm a trauma nurse, and I've run mass casualty before. We are going to do this right, or we are going to lose people. We don't have to lose. Here's the line." She pointed fast, her arm a blade. "You two medics, you do not treat anyone yet. You walk the cars with me and we tag. Green can walk. They go to the shoulder by the troopers and they wait. Yellow, they're hurt, but they've got time. We mark them and move on. Red, they're dying and they're savable. Those get hands right now. Black," her voice did not change, and that was the most frightening thing about it. "Black is the ones we can't save, and we mark them and we leave them, and we do not spend 1 minute of red time on a black. Because every minute on a body we can't save is a person we could have saved bleeding out 20 feet away. That is the rule. I will make those calls. You do not have to. Now move." We start at the bus and we work out from the fire. For a moment no one moved because she was a stranger in civilian clothes, and what she had just described was the hardest, coldest discipline in all of emergency medicine, and she had laid it out in 11 sentences, like a woman reading a grocery list, and it had landed the way a true thing lands, in the gut before the brain. The two medics looked at her. They looked at the fire. They looked at the chief. And the chief, 20 feet away, with his radio in his hand and his face going dark, said the second sentence that would haunt him. "Belay that," Garrett Voss said. "Nobody takes orders from a civilian. Trooper, I want that woman removed from my scene right now. I don't care if you have to cuff her. The rest of you, on me. We work the fire first." The trooper's name was Bo Hartigan, and he was 29 years old, and he had been on the job for 4 years, and he stood for one of the longest seconds of his life between a battalion chief telling him to cuff a woman and the woman herself, who had not stopped working while the two men argued over her. Because that was the thing Bo Hartigan saw, the thing that froze his hand on the cuff case at his belt. The chief was giving orders. The medics were standing still, caught between two authorities, and the woman in the gray fleece had simply gone back to work as if the argument were weather, something happening near her that did not concern the task. She had moved from the man with the airway, whom she had rolled onto his side, into a recovery position with a folded jacket bracing his jaw, a 30-second fix that would hold him until someone better equipped arrived, to the crushed blue sedan, and she was on her knees in the broken glass with her head and shoulders through the shattered rear window, and Bo could hear her talking to whoever was in there in that same flat, carrying, unhurried voice, and he could see her hands moving with an economy that did not look like panic and did not look like heroics, that looked, if anything, like a mechanic's hands, like someone doing a job she had done 10,000 times. "Hey, hey, look at me. What's your name?" A pause. "Marcus." "Good. Marcus, I'm Tessa. I'm a nurse. I've got you. Can you feel me squeezing your hand? Squeeze back. Good. Now I need you to keep looking at me and not at your leg, all right? Because I'm going to do something to your leg and it's going to hurt and then it's going to stop hurting. And the whole time, you're going to look at my face. Marcus. My face? There you go. And Beau Hartigan watched her free one hand, reach into the orange bag slung across her body without looking at it, her eyes never leaving the patient's face, and come out with a windlass tourniquet and get it high on a thigh that Beau now saw, with a lurch, was pumping bright arterial blood into the footwell of the sedan in a rhythm that meant the kid had maybe 4 minutes, and she ratcheted it down with a violence that did not match the gentleness of her voice. 2 hard cranks, 3, until the bright pumping stuttered and slowed and stopped, and she said, There. The hard part's done, Marcus. You did so good. The hard part is over. And she looked at her own watch and said to herself, in a different voice, clipped and exact, Tourniquet, right thigh, 7:15, and Beau Hartigan understood all at once and with absolute certainty that whatever was happening on the center line behind him, the woman in the front seat of that sedan had just saved a human life with her bare hands, while 2 senior men argued about whether she was allowed to. He took his hand off the cuff case. Chief, he said, and his voice cracked a little, and he hated that, but he said it anyway. Chief, she just tourniqueted a kid in the sedan. He was bleeding out. Chief, I think she knows what she's doing. I gave you an order, trooper. With respect, sir, your fire command. You're not my chain of command, and I'm not going to cuff a woman who's saving lives. Beau Hartigan was 29, and he was shaking, and he had just told a battalion chief no in the middle of a mass casualty incident, and it was the proudest and most frightening thing he had ever done. I'll help her. Tell me what you need, ma'am. It is a small thing in the telling, one young trooper deciding to trust the evidence of his own eyes over the man with the loudest voice. But mass casualty incidents are won and lost on exactly such small things, on whether the people on the line trust the right person in the first 10 minutes, and Beau Hartigan's decision to take his hand off his cuffs was, though he would never know it, one of the reasons the Cauldron Pass would end with a number of survivors that the after-action report would later call, in the dry language of such documents, statistically extraordinary. Tessa Calderon did not thank him. She did not have the time, and he did not need it. She backed out of the sedan window, glass falling from her shoulders, and she pointed at him without breaking stride. Trooper, what's your name? Hartigan, ma'am. Beau. Beau, you're my runner. Stay on my hip. You don't treat, you carry messages, and you carry gear, and you do exactly what I say the second I say it. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am. Then come on. We've got a line to walk. And behind them Garrett Voss stood on the center line with his radio in his hand and watched a civilian and one of his perimeter troopers walk into the smoke toward the bus, and felt the scene sliding out of his control in a way he had never once felt in 26 years, and made the decision, the human, prideful, catastrophic decision, to prove that he did not need her, to run his fire and evacuate his bus, and show this woman and his own people that the professionals had it handled. He pulled his engines toward the flames, and the line of dying that no one was walking grew, for 9 more minutes, by exactly the people Tessa Calderon had not yet reached. What a mass casualty triage actually looks like when it is done correctly is almost unbearable to watch, because most of what it consists of is walking past people who are begging you for help. This is the part the movies never show, and the part that separates the people who can truly do it from the people who only think they can. Tessa Calderon walked the line at the Cauldron Pass with Beau Hartigan at her hip and a roll of colored tape in her hand, and the first thing she did, the thing that made Beau's stomach turn over, was walk straight past a woman sitting against the guardrail with a broken arm held to her chest, crying, calling out, "Please, please, my arm, please help me." And Tessa looked at her for exactly 1 second, took in the pink of her skin and the strength of her voice, and the way she was holding the arm herself, and said gently and without stopping, "You can walk. Your arm is broken and it hurts like hell, and you are going to be completely fine. Go sit by the trooper's car up there, away from the smoke, and wait for me. You're green. Go." And she tore a strip of green tape and pressed it to the woman's good shoulder and was already moving, because the woman with the broken arm, screaming as she was the safest person on that highway, and every second spent comforting her was a second stolen from someone whose silence meant they were drowning in their own blood. "Green can walk," she said to Beau as they moved, teaching him the way she had taught 100 medics, because a runner who understands the why moves faster than one who only follows. Green talks, green complains, green is going to be fine. We do not stop for green. We do not stop for the loud ones. We stop for the quiet ones. You see somebody not moving, not making noise, gray in the face, you tell me and we go to them first, even if we have to step over 10 people who are yelling. The loud ones are advertising that their airway works and their brain has enough oxygen to be scared. It's the quiet ones who are dying. Repeat it back. "The quiet ones are dying," Beau said, and he would say it in his sleep for years. They reached the bus. Engine 2 had its doors open and 3 firefighters were lifting children down the steps. And that was good. That was correct. The bus was a fire risk and the kids needed to be off it, and Tessa let them work and did not interfere. But she stood at the bottom of the steps for 10 seconds and did the only thing the firefighters were too busy to do, which was count and sort. Most of the children coming off the bus were walking, crying, "Green." The bus had been rear-ended and rolled against the rail at low speed, and most of its passengers were bruised and terrified and fundamentally fine. But she watched their faces as they came down, and on the 4th child, a boy of about 10, being carried by a firefighter because he would not put weight on his legs, she saw it. The gray tinge, the too fast, shallow breathing, the way his eyes were not tracking, and she stepped in. Stop. Put him down here flat, gently. Beau, jacket under his neck, no. Like this." She had her hands on the boy in a second, and her voice never rose, and she talked to the firefighter the way she talked to everyone, fast and flat and certain. "He's not green. He's got a head injury or a chest injury or both. His breathing's wrong. What's his name? Did anyone get a name? Doesn't matter. Hey, buddy, hey. Squeeze my fingers. All right. He's got a pulse. It's fast." She had her ear to his chest, her hand spread flat on his ribs, and her face went very still. "Breath sounds down on the right. He's got a chest injury. He needs a needle, and he needs it in the next few minutes, and I don't have one in this bag." She looked up, and for the first time there was something other than total certainty in her face, something that Beau would only later understand was the look of a person running out of the one resource she had never had enough of, which was equipment. "I need the medics. I need their kit. Beau, go to the staging cones, find the medic units, tell them red pediatric, tension pneumothorax, chest decompression. Bring the whole bag and bring it running. Say those words, tension pneumothorax. Go." And Beau Hartigan ran. And that was when the second disaster of the morning revealed itself, because Beau got to the staging cones and found the 3 medic units exactly where Chief Voss had ordered them to stage, parked, doors closed, crews standing beside their rigs, not advancing because the incident commander had ordered them to hold until he cleared the fire, and the incident commander had not cleared the fire because the fire was not going out, because the diesel under the van was feeding it faster than 2 hose lines could knock it down. The credentialed help was 40 yards away with all the equipment in the world, and it was standing still because the man in charge had told it to. The paramedic who broke ranks was named Lena Mercado, and she was 36, and she had been running a rig in this county for 11 years, and she was the one who heard Beau Hartigan shouting the words, "tension pneumothorax," across the staging area and made the second small decision that saved the Cauldron Pass. She had been standing beside her unit with her partner and the 2 crews from the other rigs, all of them in the awful posture of trained people held back from work they could see needs doing, all of them watching the smoke and the flames and the figures moving in the wreck and feeling the specific sick helplessness of an order that is killing people. She had keyed her radio twice to ask command for permission to advance and been told twice to hold. And then a young trooper came sprinting out of the smoke, shouting about a pediatric tension pneumo and a nurse who needed a chest kit. And Lena Mercado looked at her partner, and her partner looked at her, and 11 years of running calls collapsed into a single clean choice. "Grab the trauma bag and the PEDS kit," she said. "We're going." Voss told us to hold. Voss isn't holding a dying 10-year-old. Grab the bag. And Lena Mercado, who would later stand in front of a review board and say without flinching that she would make the same decision again every single time, picked up 40 pounds of equipment and ran into the smoke behind a state trooper toward a voice she had never heard. And that act of professional disobedience was the second hinge the whole day turned on. She came around the back of the bus and found the nurse on her knees over the boy, and what Lena Mercado saw in the next 10 seconds rearranged everything she thought she knew about who this woman was. Because the nurse did not look up and ask for help, the way a panicking civilian would. She did not freeze, the way an undertrained person freezes when the real equipment arrives and the stakes get suddenly literal. She looked at the bag on Lena's shoulder and she said, fast and flat and absolutely calm, the kind of sentence that only comes out of someone who has done a thing 1,000 times. "You're the medic. Good. Right-sided tension pneumo. Pediatric. He's been deteriorating for 4 minutes. I've got a fast, thready pulse. Breath sounds absent on the right. Trachea's starting to push left. I need a 14 gauge or your pediatric decompression needle, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular, or I'll go 5th space anterior axillary if you'd rather. Your call, your kit, but it needs to be now." And Lena Mercado, 11 years on the rig, looked at this woman in a fleece reciting the landmarks for a needle decompression on a child with the unhurried precision of an instructor, and felt the hair stand up on her arms and made the only sane decision, which was to hand her the needle. "It's your patient," Lena said. "Do it. I'll bag him." What happened next took 11 seconds, and Beau Hartigan, who had run back behind them and stood frozen at the edge of it, would describe it for the rest of his life as the moment he stopped believing in credentials and started believing in competence. Tessa Calderon took the decompression needle, found the landmark on the boy's small chest with 2 fingers in less than a second, said quietly, "Sorry, buddy, here's the bad part," and slid the needle home in one smooth motion, and there was a hiss, a small, terrible, beautiful hiss of trapped air escaping a chest cavity, and the boy's frantic, failing breathing eased, and the gray began, slowly, to leave his face, and his eyes, which had been rolling and unfocused, found Tessa's face and held on. "There you are," she said to him gently. "There you are. You're okay. You're going to be okay." And then, to Lena, in the clipped exact voice, "Needle decompression, right chest, second space, 719. He'll need a chest tube in the ER, but he's stable for transport. He's your first red. Get him on oxygen and tag him and let's move, because I've got at least 3 more reds out there and we are not done." Lena Mercado would tell people later that she had worked with a lot of doctors and a lot of nurses and exactly one person who moved through a mass casualty scene like she owned the laws of physics, and that she knew within 30 seconds of meeting Tessa Calderon that the woman was not what she appeared to be, because nobody learns to do what she was doing in a hospital. "That wasn't ER training," Lena said much later to the review board. "I've got ER training. What she had, you only get one place? I didn't know what that place was yet, but I knew it the way you know a song you can't name." And while Lena got the boy onto oxygen, Tessa Calderon crouched for 1/2 second beside Beau Hartigan, who was pale and wide-eyed and trying very hard not to look like a man who had just watched a child nearly die. And she did the thing that good commanders do for the people on their line, which was see him. "Hey, Beau, look at me." He looked. "You did that. You ran when it mattered, and you said the right words, and that kid is alive because you ran. You're doing fine. Breathe and stay with me. We've got more to do, and I need you steady. Can you give me steady?" "Yes, ma'am," Beau Hartigan said, and something in his chest that had been about to come apart settled back into place, because she had given him the one thing a frightened person on a terrible scene needs, which is to be told by someone calm that he was enough. It was Lena Mercado, kneeling over the boy with the oxygen mask in her hand and the smoke rolling overhead, who said the thing the moment needed, and she said it to Beau, low, while the nurse moved off toward the next car, and it was the kind of thing a person says to a younger person to make them understand what they are watching. "Kid," Lena said, "you see how she's not stopping? You see how she walks past the ones screaming and goes to the quiet ones? Most people can't do that. It looks cold, but it's the opposite of cold. It's the whole job. Watch her. Whatever she is, watch her and learn it, because you and me are going to be telling people about this morning for the rest of our lives, and if you're going to tell it right. That the loudest man on the scene had it all wrong, and the quietest woman on it had it all right, and the difference was lives. And listen, if you've got somebody in your own life who never talks about what they did, who just shows up and does the hard thing and walks away, go thank them. Go find out who they are before something like this makes you find out the hard way." Then she pressed the mask to the boy's face and turned back to the work, because the work was not finished, and the work on the Cauldron Pass that morning was very far from finished. By 7:25, the fire was the new center of gravity, and it was beating Garrett Voss. The diesel pool under the panel van had spread to the undercarriage of 2 more vehicles, and the 2 hose lines he had committed were knocking down flame in one place only to have it bloom in another, and the wind that came down the Cauldron Pass in the mornings was pushing the smoke flat across the eastbound lanes, blinding everyone, turning the wreck into a series of orange-lit shapes looming out of gray. Voss had pulled a third of his firefighting force off rescue and onto the fire, which meant fewer hands cutting people out of cars, which meant the trapped patients were staying trapped longer, which meant the clock on every red was running while the engines fought a fire that would not die. He knew it was going wrong. That was the thing about Garrett Voss that the morning would eventually make clear, the thing that kept him from being a villain and made him something sadder and more human. He was not stupid and he was not careless, and he knew, in the part of him that had run 1,000 calls, that he was losing the scene. He could feel it the way a captain feels a ship answering the helm slower than it should, and the knowledge frightened him, and the fear made him do the thing frightened, competent men do, which was clutch the protocol harder and the chain of command tighter, because the protocol and the chain were the things that had always saved him before. He kept fighting the fire, he kept his medics staged, he kept giving good orders into a situation that had outgrown all of them, and he kept not doing the one thing that would have helped, which was admit that the woman in the fleece had been right and let her run the medical side while he ran the fire. He could not do it, not yet. There was too much of his whole life riding on being the man who did not need a civilian's help. So instead he did something worse. At 7:26, looking up from the fire to see the nurse and his trooper, and now one of his own medic crews moving through the wreck under her direction, his medic crew, the one he had ordered to hold, Garrett Voss keyed his radio and made it official. "Command to all units. Be advised, there is a civilian on scene who is directing medical operations without authority. She is to be treated as a bystander. Any personnel taking direction from her are operating outside the incident command structure and will be subject to review. I say again, the woman in the gray jacket is not part of this command. Medic 6, you are ordered to return to staging immediately." It came over the radio on Lena Mercado's shoulder. loud, while she was kneeling beside a man pinned in a pickup with Tessa Calderon's hands inside the wreck holding pressure on something Lena could not see, and Lena Mercado looked at the radio and looked at the nurse and made the third small decision of the morning, which was to reach up and turn the volume down. "You hear that?" Lena asked, not looking up. "I heard it," Tessa said, her arms buried to the elbow in the cab of the pickup, her voice perfectly even. "Don't worry about it. Keep your hands where they are. This man has a liver laceration and a pelvic fracture, and if we let go, he dies, and the radio can say whatever it wants. We'll deal with command later. Right now, we hold the line. Hold the line." Lena Mercado heard the phrase and filed it, the way she filed the landmarks and the unhurried voice, and the way the woman did the arithmetic of the dying out loud in a clipped, exact cadence that did not sound like any nurse Lena had ever worked with. She did not know yet where she had heard a person talk like that, but she was beginning to suspect, and the suspicion made her hands very steady, because if she was right about what this woman was, then they were not going to lose this man, and they were not going to lose this scene, no matter what the radio said. She was right, but it would be hours before anyone could prove it, and between now and then the Cauldron Pass had one more catastrophe to deliver, the one that would break the last of Garrett Voss's certainty and force, at last, the thing the whole morning had been building toward. The second wave came at 7:34, and it came the way these things always come, which is from the direction no one was watching. Up the Cauldron Pass, behind the original wreck, the fog had been hiding a second hazard the whole time, traffic still cresting the rise at speed, drivers who could not see the disaster until they were inside it. The troopers had been trying to close the highway, but a fog-blind interstate does not close in a minute, and at 7:34 a fuel tanker hauling 4,200 gallons of gasoline came over the rise too fast, and its driver saw the wall of stopped metal a half-second too late, and he did the only thing he could do, which was lock the brakes and lay the rig down on its side to keep from plowing into the crowd of survivors gathered on the shoulder. He saved them by doing it. He also put a tanker full of gasoline on its side 90 feet from a fire that was already winning, with its valves shrieking and a vapor cloud beginning to spread invisible across the eastbound lanes, and in one stroke the Cauldron Pass went from a bad mass casualty incident to a scene that every firefighter present understood, in their bones, could kill all of them. For about 10 seconds, the Cauldron Pass came apart completely. The tanker driver was screaming, pinned in his cab. The survivors on the shoulder began to run, some of them the wrong way, back toward the fire. 2 of Voss's firefighters on the hose line froze, looking at the tanker, looking at the flames, doing the math that every responder does and prays they never have to do for real, the math of when the heroism stops and the survival starts, when the thing to do is not to save the trapped but to run, because a gasoline tanker going up takes everyone inside 100 yards. And Garrett Voss, the incident commander, the man whose entire job in that moment was to make the single most important decision of the morning, hold or pull back, fight or run, stood on the center line and, for the first time in 26 years, did not know what to do. He froze, not for long, 3 seconds, maybe 4, but the man whose voice had been owning the radio all morning keyed his mic and got out half a word and stopped, because the decision in front of him was the kind that no protocol covers, the kind where every choice gets people killed and you have to choose anyway with no time and no information, and Garrett Voss, for all his pride and all his real skill, had never in his life had to make that exact decision, and the size of it locked his throat. The woman in the gray fleece had made that decision before, more than once, on worse ground. Tessa Calderon came up out of the pickup cab where she had been holding a man's liver together, and she took one look at the tanker on its side and the vapor shimmer and the people running the wrong way, and the cost-benefit arithmetic that had taken Garrett Voss's voice ran through her in under a second and came out the other side as orders, because that was the difference between them. The whole difference. The only difference that mattered. She had stood in this exact fire before, and she knew that the worst thing you can do when a scene tips toward catastrophe is go silent, because a line of frightened people, without a voice telling them what to do, will die of their own panic faster than the fire will kill them. She put the brass whistle to her lips and blew 2 short, hard, and then 1 long, the old signal, the one that means on me, hold, listen, and the sound cut through the chaos, and she pitched her voice over the top of it, flat and enormous and absolutely without fear, and she gave the order that saved the Cauldron Pass. Listen to me, everybody who can hear my voice. That tanker is not going to blow in the next 2 minutes. The valves are venting. That's the shriek you hear. Venting buys us time, and the vapor is going downhill away from us with the wind. We have a window. We are going to use it. Firefighters on the hose. Do not abandon that line. Keep water between the fire and the tanker. That water is the only thing buying us the window. Hold it. Everybody on the shoulder. Stop running. You are running toward the fire. Walk. Do not run. That way up the shoulder past the troopers, away from the tanker. Go. Medics. We have 90 seconds to pull every red we can reach to the far side of the troopers' line. Not the greens. The greens can walk themselves. The reds, the ones who can't move, we grab and we drag and we do not stop to be gentle. Bo, you take the kid from the bus. Lena, your liver man, I'll take his feet. Everybody else, grab a red and move. We clear the kill zone in 90 seconds and then we reassess. Go now. And the thing that happened next was the thing that Garrett Voss would never be able to fully explain to anyone, because it should not have been possible. A scene that had been 3 seconds from total collapse, a frozen commander, panicking survivors, firefighters doing the math of flight, reorganized itself around a single calm voice in the space of 15 seconds. The firefighters held the hose. The survivors stopped running and walked. The medics grabbed reds and moved, and Garrett Voss stood on the center line with his dead radio in his hand and watched a woman in a fleece do the one thing he had not been able to do, which was tell 200 terrified people exactly what to do in a voice that made them believe they would live if they did it. It was at that moment, watching her, that something cracked behind Garrett Voss's eyes. Not surrender, not yet. But the first hairline fracture in the thing he had believed all morning, which was that he was the most qualified person on his scene. Because no civilian talks like that, no nurse, however good, runs a collapsing mass casualty incident with a whistle and a voice and a vocabulary, kill zone, window, reassess, on me, that belonged to a world he had only ever read about. He looked at her, and for the first time, instead of seeing a liability in a gray fleece, Garrett Voss saw a question. Who is this woman? And right behind the question, like cold water down his spine, came the first edge of the answer he did not want. That he had spent the worst morning of his career trying to throw off his scene, the one person on it more qualified to run it than himself. He did not say any of this. He was not ready. But he stopped giving orders that countermanded hers, and in the language of a scene, that silence was the beginning of his surrender. They cleared the kill zone in 110 seconds, 20 seconds over Tessa's estimate, and the tanker did not blow, because the venting valves and the hose line and the wind held the window open exactly as she had said they would, and on the far side of the trooper's line, in the lee of an overturned box truck 140 yards from the tanker, Tessa Calderon built, out of nothing, in the middle of a highway, the thing she had built 100 times on ground that did not have highways, a casualty collection point. This is the part that Lena Mercado, watching, finally could not explain away as good nursing, because what Tessa Calderon did in the next 20 minutes was not nursing. It was command of a medical operation, and there is a difference, and Lena knew the difference, and watching the woman in the fleece do it was like watching someone who had told you they played a little piano sit down and play a concerto from memory. She organized space. Reds here, in a row, heads toward me so I can see all their faces at once. Yellows there, against the truck. Somebody who can walk checks on them every 2 minutes. Greens past the truck, sitting, out of the way. We do not mix them. I want to be able to stand here and see every red without taking a step. She organized people. Bo, you're my eyes on the reds. Anybody's color changes, anybody goes quiet, you call it. Lena, you and your partner are my hands on the worst too. You two firefighters, you just got freed up from the bus? Good. You're litter teams now, you move patients where I point and nowhere else. You, the off-duty guy who said he's an EMT, you take the yellows, reassess them every 2 minutes. Anybody slides toward red, you grab me. She organized supplies. Everything that came off the rigs goes here, in the open, where I can see it and grab it. Tourniquets here, airways here, chest kits here. We are going to run out of things, and when we do, I want to know exactly what we have left. And she organized the one thing that mattered most, which was information, because she stood in the center of that collection point, and she kept, in her head, with no paper and no computer, a running count of every patient, every injury, every intervention, every clock, a thing called situational awareness that is the single hardest skill in all of emergency medicine and the one that almost no one can hold under real pressure, and she held it the way other people hold a grocery list, and she narrated it out loud in a clipped exact cadence so that her team could hold it too. Talk to me. Where are we? She did this every 3 minutes. A discipline. A heartbeat. I have 6 reds. Pediatric chest. Stable on the needle. He's transport priority 1 when a rig opens up. Liver and pelvis. That's our worst. He needs an OR yesterday. Pressure's holding, but it won't hold long. Femur bleed, tourniqueted, stable, priority 2. Head injury, the man from the first sedan, GCS is dropping. Watch him, he may need an airway. Crush injury, both legs, he's stable now, but when we free him, he's going to crash from the toxins. Nobody moves him until I'm standing there with the kit. And the tanker driver, when they cut him out, is an unknown. I have 4 yellows holding. I have 11 greens. I have 1 black. Her voice did not change on the word. Front seat of the first van. Nothing to be done. We marked him and we left him, and that was correct, and I'll carry it, not you. Questions? No? Good. Keep working. Bo Hartigan, standing at the foot of the red row with his eyes moving from face to face the way she had taught him, heard her say, I'll carry it, not you, and understood dimly that he was watching not just a skilled person, but a particular kind of person, the kind who takes the weight of the dead onto herself so the people working for her do not have to, and he did not have a word for it yet, but he knew it was the rarest thing he had ever seen. Lena Mercado had the word. She had been circling it all morning, and now, watching Tessa Calderon stand in the center of a collection point she had built out of a highway and run it with a whistle and a voice and a count she carried in her head, Lena Mercado finally let herself think the word, and the word was officer. Not a nurse, an officer, a commander, somebody who had somewhere, at some cost Lena could only guess at, learned to run the line where people die, not as a clinician, but as a leader of clinicians, the one whose word is final, the one they look to when the tanker is on its side and the commander has gone silent. She did not know how right she was, but she was about to find out because at 8:10, with the fire finally yielding to the hose lines and the first ambulances finally breaking through the jam to begin transports and the worst of the Cauldron Pass beginning, at last, to turn, a second wave of help arrived from an unexpected direction, and one of the people in it knew exactly who the woman in the gray fleece was. The convoy that came up the closed westbound lanes against the flow of the disaster was not, at first, anything anyone noticed in the chaos. 3 vehicles, a dark SUV, a blunt-nosed military-style ambulance painted in the muted gray-green of a service nobody on the scene could immediately place, and a second SUV behind, moving fast up the empty westbound side with their lights going, having heard the mass-casualty call go out across every channel in the region and responded the way that particular kind of unit responds, which is by showing up to the worst thing in 100 miles whether or not anyone asks them to. They were a fictional thing, that convoy, a forward medical detachment from a regional installation of the Joint Expeditionary Medical Command, out on a training rotation 40 minutes away, monitoring the emergency net, rolling toward a mass casualty incident because rolling toward mass casualty incidents was, in the most literal sense, what they existed to do. And the officer in the lead SUV, a tall, spare man of 50 with gray at his temples, and a quietness about him that the younger people in his command had learned meant he was thinking hardest exactly when he said least, was a fictional full colonel named Aaron Whitfield, and he had spent 11 years of his own career in the same small, hard corner of military medicine as the woman in the gray fleece, and he was about to have the strangest morning of his life. He did not recognize her at first. No one would have. She was on her knees in the lee of an overturned box truck with both hands inside a man's open abdomen, and her gray fleece soaked black to the elbows, and a smear of someone else's blood across her cheekbone and her short hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, and she looked like exactly what Garrett Voss had taken her for at 7-Eleven, which was a civilian who had wandered into something too big for her. Colonel Whitfield came out of the SUV and took in the scene with the fast, total, professional sweep of a man who had taken in a great many terrible scenes, and what he saw made him stop, because the scene was wrong in a way that was, for him, immediately and deeply familiar. It was organized. That was the wrong thing. A mass casualty incident this size, this far into it, with a fire and a tanker and a fog, should have been chaos, a churn of responders treating whoever was loudest, no structure, no flow, and instead Aaron Whitfield was looking at a textbook casualty collection point, reds in a row with their heads toward a central command position, yellows segregated, greens out of the way, supplies laid out in the open and sorted, litter teams moving on someone's direction, a runner calling out color changes, a single calm voice in the center of it holding the whole picture. He was looking at the thing he had spent his career teaching young officers to build and watching most of them fail to build under pressure. He was looking at it on a civilian highway, run, apparently, by a woman in a soaked gray fleece with her hands inside a dying man. "Who is running this?" Colonel Whitfield asked the nearest person, who happened to be Bo Hartigan. "The nurse, sir," Bo pointed. "Her. She's been running the whole medical side since before the fire. The chief tried to throw her off, but she just kept going. She's incredible, sir. I've never seen anything like it." "A nurse," said Colonel Whitfield, and something in his voice made Bo look at him. The colonel was staring at the woman in the center of the collection point with an expression Bo could not read, an expression that was not quite recognition and not quite disbelief, the expression of a man hearing the first 3 notes of a song he had not heard in years. "What's her name, son?" "Tessa, sir. Tessa Calderon." And Colonel Aaron Whitfield went very still. It is a strange thing the way a name lands. Aaron Whitfield had not heard the name Tessa Calderon spoken aloud in 4 years, and in the world he had shared with her it had not been the name people used anyway. In that world she had been a rank and a call sign and a single word spoken into a radio under fire, and the name Tessa Calderon had been almost a private thing, the name on the orders, the name on the citation he had stood at attention to hear read. He looked at the woman in the gray fleece, And now that he had the name, the years fell away, and he saw it, under the blood and the sweat and the soaked civilian clothes, the set of the shoulders, the way she held her hands, the flat, unhurried voice running the count, the brass whistle on the worn paracord lanyard that he had seen her wear on 3 continents, and Colonel Aaron Whitfield, 50 years old, a man not given to displays, felt the back of his throat tighten, because the last time he had seen that whistle and heard that voice, it had been on the worst night of both their lives, and she had carried 31 people out of a fire that should have killed them all, and they had given her the Meridian Cross for it, and he had been there. "Colonel," said one of his own people, coming up beside him with the unit's trauma kit, "where do you want us?" Aaron Whitfield did not answer right away. He was watching Tessa Calderon finish what she was doing inside the dying man, watching her say something to the medic beside her, watching her sit back on her heels for 1/2 second and close her eyes and put one bloody hand flat against her own chest where the whistle hung, the smallest gesture, a thing you would never notice unless you knew what it meant. And Aaron Whitfield knew exactly what it meant, because he had seen her do it 100 times before she gave an order she did not want to give, and the sight of it, here, on a fog-bound highway 4 years and a whole life away from where he had last seen it, undid something in him. "Set up there, behind her," he said quietly to his people. "Reinforce her line. Whatever she's running, we slot into it. She's the commander on this ground, not us. Do not take over. Take orders. Move." His people, who did not yet understand, hesitated. "Sir, she's a civilian." "She is not a civilian," Colonel Whitfield said, and there was something in his voice now that straightened every back within range of it. "Set up behind her and wait for my word. That's an order." Garrett Voss saw the colonel before he understood what he was seeing. He had spent the last 20 minutes in a kind of suspended agony fighting his fire, watching it finally begin to yield, and watching, out of the corner of an eye he could not quite keep off her, the woman in the gray fleece run a medical operation more cleanly than he had ever seen one run, with his own people falling into her line one by one, his medics, his firefighters, his trooper, all of them orbiting her now and not him, and the worst part, the part that sat in his chest like a stone, was that they were right to. He had known it for 20 minutes. He had not been able to say it, and now a military convoy had come up the closed lanes, and a tall, gray-templed colonel had stepped out of it and taken one look at his scene, and Garrett Voss, who had spent the morning insisting the professionals had it handled, walked toward the colonel with the half-formed intention of finally getting some credentialed backup who would help him put the civilian back in her place. "Chief Garrett Voss, County Fire Incident Commander," he said, putting out his hand. "Glad to have you, Colonel. We've got a mass casualty situation, and frankly, we've got a civilian who's inserted herself into medical operations. I could use a hand getting—" "Chief Voss." Colonel Whitfield shook his hand once firmly, and his eyes did not leave the collection point. "Walk with me a moment." They walked, Voss talking, gesturing at the scene, explaining his fire suppression, his evacuation, the difficulty of the tanker, the problem of the civilian. The colonel, silent, listening, his eyes on the woman in the gray fleece who was now directing one of his own medical teams to take over the liver and pelvis patient, slotting Whitfield's people into her line without missing a beat, not knowing yet who had arrived. And when Garrett Voss got to the part about the civilian again, "I tried to remove her 3 times. She refused lawful orders. I'll need you to back me when this goes to review. A nurse has no business running." Colonel Aaron Whitfield stopped walking and turned and looked at Garrett Voss for the first time, fully, and asked a single quiet question that Garrett Voss would replay for the rest of his life. "Chief, the woman in the gray jacket, did she, at any point this morning, tell you who she was?" Voss frowned. "She said she was a nurse, a trauma nurse. Said she'd run mass-casualty before. Frankly, Colonel, anybody can say, and you didn't ask. What? You didn't ask her name, or her background, or where a trauma nurse learns to run a casualty collection point and call a kill zone and hold a venting tanker with a hose line. The Colonel's voice was not unkind. It was worse than unkind. It was patient, the patience of a man explaining something to someone who is about to understand it all at once and badly. You looked at a woman in a fleece and you decided you knew everything you needed to know, and you spent the worst morning of your career trying to throw the most qualified person on this scene off of it. Chief, I have been doing this for almost 30 years, and I have built and run more mass casualty operations than I can count. And I am telling you that what that woman has done on this highway this morning, with no equipment and no authority and your active opposition, is the best field triage I have ever personally witnessed. Not good for a nurse. The best. Period. Garrett Voss opened his mouth and closed it, and the stone in his chest grew teeth. "Who is she?" he asked, and his voice came out smaller than he meant it to. And Colonel Aaron Whitfield turned back toward the collection point, toward the woman in the gray fleece who was at that moment looking up, finally, at the gray-green ambulance and the uniformed people and the tall, familiar shape of a man she had not seen in 4 years, her face going from focus to still to something Voss could not name, and the Colonel said, "Watch." Tessa Calderon saw the whistle first, not Whitfield's face, her eyes sweeping up from the patient to assess the new arrivals the way she assessed everything, took in the gray-green ambulance and the muted uniforms and the unit markings, and she knew in half a second what they were, a forward medical detachment, her own old kind, and her chest did something complicated. And then she saw the man, and the years did to her what they had done to him, and for 1 second, the flat, unhurried mask she had worn all morning slipped, and Beau Hartigan, watching her face because he had spent 2 hours learning to read it, saw the woman who had been a wall of calm through a fire and a tanker and a child's near-death go, suddenly young and stricken and unguarded, the way a person looks when the past walks up to them across a highway. "Colonel Whitfield," she said. It came out quiet. "Tessa." He had crossed the distance to her without Voss quite seeing him move. He stood at the edge of her collection point, this tall gray officer, and he looked down at the woman kneeling in the blood with her bare red hands and her soaked fleece and the brass whistle on its worn cord, and his face, Garrett Voss saw this, would never forget it. His face was not the face of a superior greeting a subordinate. It was something else. It was the face of a man in the presence of something he held in genuine awe. "I heard the call go out. I had a detachment 40 minutes out on a rotation. I didn't know it was you. I didn't—" He stopped and steadied, and the next thing he said carefully, formally, in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as it needed to and no farther, the way you say a thing you have decided the moment requires. "Of all the people who could have been standing on this ground when it came apart, of course it was you. Of course it was. It's just Tessa now, sir," she said. "I'm a nurse. I came off a night shift. I was driving home." It was almost a plea, the way she said it. Let it be that. Let me be that. And Aaron Whitfield heard the plea, and Garrett Voss heard it too, and did not understand it, and was about to. "Tessa." The Colonel crouched down to her level, slowly, the way you approach someone you do not want to startle, and he put one hand briefly on her shoulder, on the soaked gray fleece, and he said it gently, and he said it so the whole scene could hear, because some things have to be said where everyone can hear them or they do not count. I have been doing this for 28 years. I have never seen a casualty collection point run better than the one you built on this highway this morning, not in a school, not in a war, not anywhere, with no kit and no authority, and a fire and a tanker and a fire chief trying to throw you off your own line." He paused, and his eyes did not leave hers. You held the line, Commander, the way you always did. You held it. The word landed on the Cauldron Pass like a struck bell. Commander. Garrett Voss heard it and did not understand it, and understood it completely, both at once, the way you understand a thing your whole body has been bracing for. Lena Mercado heard it and went still over her patient and thought, there it is. There's the word. I knew it. I knew it. Bo Hartigan heard it and felt the hair stand up on his neck. And around the collection point, one by one, the firefighters and the medics and the troopers who had been working under this woman's voice for 2 hours without knowing what she was, heard a full colonel of a military medical command crouch down in the blood and call the nurse in the gray fleece commander, and the meaning of it rolled out across the scene in a widening ring of silence. Sir, Tessa said very low, please don't. They should know who's been keeping them alive, the colonel said, just as low, just for her. And then, standing, turning, addressing the scene in the clear, carrying voice of a man who has decided that a debt is going to be paid in front of witnesses. For those of you who don't know, and I'd guess that's all of you, the woman who has been running your medical operation this morning is Colonel Tessa Calderon of the Joint Expeditionary Medical Command. Before she was your nurse, she commanded the 9th Forward Resuscitation Team. Her people called her Anvil. They called her Commander. I served under her on a night I don't talk about, when she ran a casualty collection point through 6 hours of fire and brought out 31 people who were supposed to die, and they pinned the Meridian Cross on her for it. And I stood in that formation, and I have spent every day since being grateful I got to watch her work. He looked at Garrett Voss when he said the last part, not cruelly, but directly, so there could be no mistaking it. She is the most qualified trauma commander I have ever known, and she has spent this entire morning letting you call her a civilian and saving your patients anyway, because that is who she is. That is who she has always been. A silence came down over the Cauldron Pass then that no one who stood in it ever forgot. The fire crackled, lower now, beaten. The valves on the tanker shrieked, venting, harmless. Somewhere a patient moaned, and on the broken center line of the eastbound lanes in front of his own exhausted men, Battalion Chief Garrett Voss stood and looked at the woman he had ordered off his scene at 7-Eleven. Step back. Nurse, let the professionals work, and understood, fully and finally and all at once, exactly whose hands he had pushed away. What Garrett Voss did then was the thing that saved him, in the end, from being a small man in this story. He could have made excuses. A smaller man would have. He could have said he could not have known, that she should have told him, that she had refused lawful orders, that any reasonable commander would have done the same, and all of it would have been technically true, and all of it would have been beside the point, and Garrett Voss, to his lasting credit, knew it was beside the point, because the point was not whether he could have known, the point was what he had done. He had looked at a person and decided she was small because she did not look like his idea of large, and he had been wrong in the most consequential way. A man in his position can be wrong, and people had nearly died of his being wrong, and the only thing left to a man who has been that wrong is to own it completely and out loud. So he walked across the broken asphalt, past his own men, to where Tessa Calderon was getting slowly to her feet, exhausted now, the adrenaline draining, her bloody hands hanging at her sides, the whistle dark against her soaked fleece, and Garrett Voss stopped in front of her, and for 3 full seconds, the two of them just looked at each other, the fire chief and the colonel, the dismisser and the dismissed, and the whole scene held its breath. Colonel Calderon, Garrett Voss said. His voice was not steady. He did not try to make it steady. I owe you an apology, and it's bigger than I know how to make. I called you a liability. I tried 3 times to have you removed. I had a state trooper told to put you in handcuffs. He swallowed. And the entire time, you were the best thing on the scene, and I was too proud to see it, and people in those cars are alive because you ignored me. I was wrong. I was wrong in every way a man can be wrong, and I'm—" His voice cracked, and he let it. "I am more sorry than I have words for. You should have my job. You'd have done it better from the first minute." And then Battalion Chief Garrett Voss, 26 years on the job, did the thing that none of his men had ever seen him do for anyone. He came to attention, boots together, shoulders back, chin level, and he raised his right hand in a slow, deliberate, unpracticed salute. A civilian's salute, a salute he had no formal right to give and every human right in the world to give, and he held it. Tessa Calderon looked at him. For a moment she did not move, and the cost of the whole morning was in her face. The dead man in the front seat of the van that she would carry, the child who had nearly died on the bus, the 4 years of quiet she had built and just lost, the whole weight of being seen when all she had wanted was to do the work and disappear. And then she did the thing that told everyone watching exactly what kind of officer she had been. The thing that was the whole of her in a single gesture. She did not gloat. She did not let him hold the salute long enough to make it a punishment. She stepped forward and she put her bloody right hand out, and she gently took his saluting hand down out of the air and held it in both of hers, and she said quietly, just to him, so that only he and the men closest could hear, "At ease, Chief. You ran toward a tanker full of gas this morning instead of away from it. That's not nothing. You made some bad calls and you'll think about them for a long time, and that's how it should be. But you didn't run, and your people didn't run, and most of them are alive because your engines held that hose line on that tanker when every instinct said drop it and go. We held that line together. So put the hand down and let's finish the work, because we are not done, and the living don't care who was right." She let go of his hand. "Now, I've got a crush injury that's going to crash the second we free his legs, and I need your best 2 firefighters and a backboard. Can you get me that?" And Garrett Voss, Battalion Chief, 26 years, just publicly humbled by a woman in a fleece, and just somehow, in the same breath, handed back his dignity by her, said, "Yes, Commander," and turned and ran to get her what she needed, and did not realize until later that night, lying awake, that she had called him chief with respect and meant it, and that being forgiven like that by someone he had wronged that badly was the hardest and best thing that had ever happened to him. They worked the Cauldron Pass for 3 more hours, and Tessa Calderon ran all of it, and now everyone let her. The change in the scene after the reveal was the kind of thing the after-action report could not capture, but everyone who was there could feel. The way a confused, contested operation became a clean one the moment its true commander was acknowledged. Colonel Whitfield's detachment slotted into her line, and she ran them too, military and civilian both, fire and EMS, and her own old kind of unit, all of it under the flat, unhurried voice and the brass whistle, all of it organized around the count she carried in her head. The crush injury patient crashed exactly when she said he would, the moment the firefighters freed his legs, and the toxins that had built up in the trapped tissue flooded his bloodstream, and she was standing over him with the kit ready and brought him back. Calcium and fluids and a sodium bicarb push, and her hands and her voice, and the firefighters who had freed him stood and watched her save the man they had just inadvertently nearly killed, and understood, finally and completely, what they had been arguing about at 7-Eleven. The tanker driver came out alive. The liver and pelvis man made it to surgery. The boy from the bus got his chest tube and would be home in a week. The man whose airway she had opened in the first 30 seconds, the very first patient, the one she had been kneeling over when Garrett Voss said, "Step back, nurse," he lived, and 3 days later he would learn the name of the woman who had refused to step back, and he would not be able to stop crying when he heard it. In the end, of the 41 vehicles and the people in them, the Cauldron Pass killed 3. The man in the front seat of the panel van, who had died on impact before any help could have reached him, an elderly woman in a sedan near the back of the pileup who had a cardiac event in the chaos and whom no triage in the world could have saved, and one of the original drivers who succumbed in surgery 2 days later to injuries that Whitfield himself, reviewing the case, would call non-survivable from the moment of impact. 3. On a scene that, by every model the county ran afterward, by every comparison to similar incidents, should have killed 15 or 20. The difference? The 12 or 15 people who went home who, by the cold arithmetic of mass casualty, should not have, was a woman in a gray fleece who had stepped back exactly 1 step, done a count, and then refused to stay back on the morning a frightened man told her to let the professionals work. The reckoning came afterward, the way it always does, in the dry rooms where the loud morning gets turned into paper. A review board followed, because there is always a review board. A civilian had directed medical operations at a county mass casualty incident over the express objection of the incident commander. Medics had abandoned their staging on her word. A state trooper had refused a direct order from Fire Command. By the letter of every protocol in 3 agencies, the Cauldron Pass had been run wrong, and the people who ran it had to answer for it, and they sat in a fluorescent-lit conference room 4 weeks later and answered for it one by one. Lena Mercado went first, and she did not flinch, and she said, for the record, "I disobeyed a staging order to bring a chest kit to a dying 10-year-old at the direction of the most qualified trauma provider on that scene, and I would do it again today, and I'd do it again tomorrow, and if disobeying that order is a problem for this board, then the problem is the board." They did not discipline Lena Mercado. They promoted her eventually to a training role because someone on the board was smart enough to understand that you do not punish the people who, in the worst minute, trusted the right person. Bo Hartigan went next, 29 years old, sitting very straight, and he said, "Chief Voss ordered me to handcuff a woman who was at that moment saving a child's life with a tourniquet. I declined. I'd decline again." And the board, which had been prepared to be hard on a trooper who refused an order at a chaotic scene, found that it could not be, because the woman in question turned out to be a decorated military trauma commander, and the trooper turned out to have been right, and being right, it turns out, covers a great deal. And then Garrett Voss went, and Garrett Voss did the thing that finished his transformation from the man who said, "Step back, nurse into something better." He did not defend himself. He sat in front of a board that was, in fact, prepared to go easy on the incident commander. He was the ranking professional. He had made defensible calls under impossible conditions. The fire and the tanker had been genuine catastrophes, and he refused the easy exit. "I want it in the record," Garrett Voss said, "that I was wrong, not unlucky, not overwhelmed, wrong. I had the best trauma commander in the region standing on my scene offering to run my triage, and I tried to have her arrested because she didn't look like my idea of an expert. People nearly died of my pride. I'm asking this board not to discipline Trooper Hartigan or Medic Mercado because they did the right thing when I did the wrong one, and I'm asking that we change how this department trains incident command so that the next chief who's standing on the worst day of his life learns to ask who's offering to help before he throws them off his scene. That's my statement. That's all of it." He retired 18 months later, on his own terms, and the last thing he did before he turned in his white helmet was establish, with his own pension money and a great deal of stubbornness, a county training program in mass casualty triage and incident command, and he asked exactly one person to help him design the curriculum, and she said yes. Tessa Calderon did not want any of it. She did not want the local news, which got hold of the story and ran it for a week. Hero nurse turns out to be decorated colonel, and which she declined every time to talk to. She did not want the commendation the county tried to give her, though she accepted it in the end quietly, because Hollis, the retired machinist, told her over a plate of August tomatoes that accepting it gracefully was a kindness to the people who needed to give it, And he was right, and she had never been able to argue with him. She did not want to be Colonel Calderon again. She had given that up on purpose. On a specific night she could date to the hour, and the Cauldron Pass had not changed her mind. If anything, it had confirmed it, because what she had felt, in the center of that collection point with the count running in her head and the lives in her hands, was not pride or vindication or even satisfaction. It was the old weight. The weight of being the one who decides. The weight she had come home to put down. But she let one thing change. She had been, for 4 years, a woman no one looked at twice, by deliberate and patient design, and she had told herself that the anonymity was peace. And somewhere in the long aftermath of the Cauldron Pass, in the review board, in the commendation she did not want, in the face of the man whose airway she had opened, who tracked her down at the air medical base 3 weeks later and stood in front of her unable to speak, and finally just took her hand in both of his and held it, the way she had held Garrett Voss's saluting hand. Somewhere in all of that, Tessa Calderon came to understand something she had been hiding from since she came home, that the anonymity had not entirely been peace, some of it had been hiding, and that there was a difference between not needing to be seen and refusing to be of use, and she had let the line between those two things blur, and the Cauldron Pass had shown her exactly where it was. So when Garrett Voss came to her, hat in his hands, and asked her to help him build a triage program to teach the next generation of medics and firefighters and troopers how to run the line when the worst day comes, she did not say no. She said yes, and she found, standing in front of a classroom of young responders with a brass whistle in her hand, teaching them the thing she knew better than almost anyone alive, that there was a kind of being seen that did not cost her anything. That, in fact, gave something back, not being celebrated for what she had done, but being useful for what she knew. She could live with that. She could even, slowly, come to want it. She kept the flight nurse job. She still spent her shifts being lowered out of a helicopter onto the worst day of strangers' lives, and she was still very good at it, and most of the new people who came through the air medical service still knew her only as the quiet, exact nurse who never talked about herself. Except that now, when one of them was about to come apart on a bad call, she would catch their eye and say something flat and steadying and certain, and they would settle, the way Beau Hartigan had settled, and not know why, except that there was something about her, something they could not name, that made you believe you would get through it if you just did the next correct thing. On a cold morning in March, 5 months after the Cauldron Pass, Tessa Calderon stood in front of her first full class of the county's new mass-casualty course, 22 young responders in folding chairs, and she taught them the only thing that had ever really mattered. She did not teach them with slides. She taught them the way she had been taught, which was with a single object and a single hard truth. She took the brass whistle off from around her neck, the first time most of them had seen it, the worn brass gone the color of an old penny, the 4 words stamped along its side almost rubbed away. And she set it on the table in front of the room where they could all see it, and she said, "This was given to me by the first person who taught me how to do this, a long time ago, on hard ground. She is gone now. She was the best I ever knew, and she told me one thing on the worst night we ever worked together, and I have never forgotten it, and I'm going to give it to you, and then we're going to spend 10 weeks learning how to live up to it." She picked up the whistle and turned it in her fingers so the light caught the stamped words, and she read them aloud, the way the machinist had stamped them, the way her teacher had read them to her 19 years before. Steady hands, hard ground. "It means," Tessa Calderon said, "that the day you'll be needed is the day everything is on fire and nobody knows what to do, and the ground under you is the worst ground there is, and on that day, the only thing you will have, the only thing, is whether your hands are steady and whether you've decided, in advance, that you will not look away. The equipment runs out, the help comes late, The person in charge is sometimes wrong. None of that is your problem on the day. Your problem is the patient in front of you and the count in your head and whether you can stay steady when everyone else can't. That's the whole job. Everything else is details. She set the whistle back down on the table in the same spot, and the worn brass caught the cold March light. I'm going to teach you the details, but the steady hands are on you. Nobody can give you those. You decide right now, before the worst day comes, whether you're going to be the person who steps back when someone tells you to, or the person who does the count, and steps forward and holds the line. Decide now, because on the day there won't be time. In the third row, a young woman she did not yet know, a paramedic student, 24 years old, who had read about the Cauldron Pass in the paper and signed up for the course the next day, leaned over to the person beside her and whispered, the way people whisper when they have just decided what they want to be. If you've gotten this far and you're still listening, you're in the right room. Stay for all 10 weeks. This is the one that matters. And she straightened up and took out a pen and got ready to learn. Tessa Calderon did not hear the whisper. She had turned back to the board to begin the first lesson, the brass whistle on the table beside her catching the light. 4 words almost rubbed away, but still, if you knew where to look, just legible. Steady hands, hard ground, and she picked up a marker and wrote, at the top of the board, the first principle, the one everything else hangs from, the one a frightened man on a fog-bound highway had needed to learn the hard way. The quiet ones are dying. Go to the quiet ones. And somewhere 5 months and a lifetime behind her on a broken stretch of the Cauldron Pass, a fire chief who had once said, "Step back, nurse, let the professionals work," was learning to teach the same lesson to a new generation of his own. And a young trooper named Beau Hartigan was carrying a sentence he would say in his sleep for the rest of his life. And the worn brass whistle that had started more triage lines than anyone could count sat warm in the hand of the woman who had never once needed to tell anyone who she was, because the people who really do the thing almost never do. She had stepped back exactly 1 step, and then she had held the line. That was tonight's story from Unspoken Valor. Some heroes never ask to be seen, but they're always worth the salute. If this one stood you at attention, stay with us and tell us in the comments, who's the quiet one in your life who held the line long before anyone knew what they were?